Hello and welcome to the Positive Future of Health podcast. I'm your host, Finch, creator of the pain-free method. How to be pain-free from long-term pain or chronic conditions by tuning into you, by releasing the symptoms and everything that's created them. And if you want to find out more about that, please go to painfreedom.co.uk. And as well as teaching people how to be pain free with my method, I also host this podcast where I invite natural health experts and positive thinkers to come and share their wisdom and knowledge with everybody, with us, to spread the word further and educate all of us so we can all improve and improve our lives, improve ourselves, and help ourselves. So, on today's podcast, I have Tracey Robinson. And we met Tracey. We're in the same business group together because I'm first a therapist. I had to learn business, or I'm learning business, and we're in this amazing group. Um, big what's Catherine call her? Business for the heart. Is that
Yeah, business from the
um,
heart. Yeah.
Business from the Heart? Thanks. And by Catherine Watkins, and she's absolutely brilliant and gets us all together and teaches us with a stick. Come on, everybody! This is how you do it. And we gather together twice a year. And Tracy and I got chatting, and I was thrilled about what she's doing. So, Tracy, can you tell us about yourself? Who are you? How did you get into the work that you do? What drew you to what you do these days?
Yeah, so hi everyone, and thanks for having me on, Alfie. I've been really inspired by some of your previous episodes, so it's really lovely to get a chance to be here and talk about what I do.
You're welcome.
So I'm Tracey Robinson, and I'm quite new to sort of running my own business and developing my own method. Last year, I left the NHS after over 30 years, so most of my career has been in the NHS. So I started off as a mental health occupational therapist. So I was working with adults with mental health issues, delivering assessments and treatments using occupational therapy, where we support people with their day-to-day functioning, whether it's work, leisure, activities of daily living, running a lot of groups, people are coping with their life, during their mental illness, helping to enable and empower them to take back control of their day-to-day activities, including getting back to work if that's something for them. So I did that work for 10 years, and I was a manager. I was running a day hospital, leading a team. And then I had my first baby, and this was nearly 22 years ago now. And I'd had no history of mental illness myself, but out of the blue, when I had my baby, I developed an illness which we now call postpartum psychosis. So, so I had, a kind of a traumatic birth in a way, and I didn't get very much sleep the first few days after the birth. I was trying to breastfeed and it wasn't going well. And over really the first kind of week and a half, my mood escalated into being very manic. I developed beliefs that weren't true, particularly about money, like believing we had a lot more money than we did. So I spent an awful lot of time booking holidays we couldn't possibly have gone on with a baby anyway, buying things online. And at its worst state of that mania, I wasn't able to sleep at all. So even when the baby was sleeping, between all my difficult attempts to breastfeed and getting mastitis and everything, I just couldn't sleep at all because my mood was so manic. So I was having these kind of delusions about money and various things, but also I was having hallucinations. So I would see my baby's head like on passers-by, or on my husband when he came into the room. I'd look up and it wouldn't be his face. I'd see it was the baby, and I was in town, and this is happening. But I sort of didn't realize I was becoming seriously unwell. At first, I was putting it down to lack of sleep, and also this seeing the baby's head on other people. I thought, well, maybe it's part of bonding, like being really focused on the baby and kind of seeing them in everything. And so at first I realised things weren't quite right, but I just thought it was lack of sleep. But by the time kind of my family and friends brought help in from, of course, the mental health services that I was working in and around, I had no insight at all into the fact I was unwell. And my first point of contact with services back then within the NHS with mental health professionals was I just opened the front door and there was four people stood there, some of whom I vaguely knew from work. And within the few seconds it clicked. And at first I thought, oh, how lovely they come to visit me and the baby. I didn't know them well, but wasn't kind of thinking straight. And but within a few
So
minutes,
how did they come? Was your husband, did your husband
yeah,
call them,
so
or
my husband and family members that also worked in mental health and friends that worked in mental health had become very concerned about my mental state. They were unable to talk to me about it. I thought all my thoughts and beliefs were true. So I was very argumentative with people whenever they tried to challenge me. Someone challenged me on the phone, I just pulled the plug out the wall, wouldn't speak to them anymore because in my mind, my beliefs and what I was saying were true and accurate. And I believed that I'd just become a much happier, carefree person after having a baby. And why are they trying to stop me just being happy and, being positive and freely spending money and, lots of things that are probably quite opposite to what I was normally like. So they'd called in services, but things are structured differently now. There's things like crisis teams and mental health in the NHS, but there wasn't anything like that back then. So these four people that turned up on my doorstep were there to see if I needed to be sectioned. Um, so
sounds really scary. I would be,
yeah.
that would freak me out if that happened to me.
Yeah, so I was like terrified, and I got this really distinct memory of sitting on my sofa with them around me in the room and looking through a conservatory at the back fence, wondering if I could manage to get over it if I ran away. Because after not realizing I was unwell and disagreeing with everybody else, suddenly I had a moment of stark realization, even if it was I didn't believe I was unwell myself, a moment of stark realization this is serious. Other people think I'm unwell, I might lose my liberty. And of course, running through my head was all the people I'd worked with themselves who'd been very unwell and they'd lost their careers and perhaps they'd never got well because, back then in the early 90s, a lot of people had been institutionalized, people I'd worked with had been unwell for years and hadn't
So how
recovered.
awful.
So
Why
yeah,
do you
so
think
it,
why do you think this happened to you though? Because you were already in the knowledge of what goes on in that kind of world. And so you're very educated up about it all, see people firsthand. Why do you think it happened to you? Do you understand what happened to you?
I mean, I sort of piecing together more about understanding it over the years, but at the time as well, when they turned up, and I narrowly avoided being sectioned, in fact, but that was only because had family and friends who knew about mental health, so the team were able to think, okay, she can be safely looked after at home. But in a different circumstance, I would have been sectioned. But with postpartum psychosis, what I go now is nobody, we still don't really know why it happens. There's definitely, they think, genetic factors in family history. And certainly when I looked back, other kind of female family members had sort of mental illness and particularly linked to
Really?
times of change in hormones. So what they think is a big factor and a big risk around it is that massive fluctuation in hormones you get after you've had a baby. So when the baby's born, there's a real dip in those hormones that are there, and because the hormones, the mind-body interaction, and they impact a lot on mental health. They think that's a big factor, and the other big factor is sleep. So when I was in the hospital, I was made to stay in for about 3 nights because I couldn't establish breastfeeding, but it was a very noisy ward. So I was getting this escalate after, being up most of the night giving birth, this escalating sleep loss. So they think sleep is another sort of big factor. So it's not really sort of no amount of knowledge or kind of understanding of mental health can necessarily prevent it because it is
Wow.
a very, rare and serious psychiatric emergency.
It really is, isn't it? Because your baby's under threat, your whole family's under threat, you're under threat, in danger. And I mean, I had some kind of, I mean, you do have a massive shift. I mean, I had two babies, and I couldn't latch on my baby either. I was doing it wrong. It was my first baby. I hadn't had my hands on a newborn, I think, ever. But I mean, I used to babysit and look after young ones when I was younger, but I was then 40, and I hadn't had my hands on a little a newborn ever. So I mean, it's
Mm,
very new for anybody, I think. And of course, you'll be barely they feed every hour practically in the first month, and
mm,
or everything new. And then if you can't latch on, that's very distressful, isn't it? And my baby bit my nipple. It was painful.
mm,
But I mean, I don't recognize what you went through, but I definitely became my protection button went vroom like that when I had the baby.
mm,
I hadn't even been out for a month, and my mum came to go for a walk with me with the baby, and I was all paranoid that anyone's going to take my baby like that,
mm,
you know.
mm,
And over the next 2 or 3 years, I was absolutely, well, several years, I was so terrified that of all this paedophilia that you hear about, I was absolutely um um I had a radar, a protection button out for that. So I don't know. I mean, I went down the conspiracy route heavily, and I did have social workers at one point, um, but I don't think I had psychosis. I'm not quite sure, but your buttons are really hyped up when you have a
mm,
baby.
mm.
It's just the way that it is, isn't
Absolutely.
it?
And I think that's the thing. Like, so going into having a baby from a professional career, I'd always been successful in my degree, in my training, in my career, and organized everything by being kind of practical and organized and using evidence-based kind of intelligence or whatever to decide what to do. It's like totally bewildering, I think, having a baby when you've lived like that. I mean, I felt, so the whole birthing process, I felt out of control of my body and I'd never suffered that type of pain and all the mess involved and everything. That I think that came as a total shock to me. And then with having a baby, as you say, just having to be there for all their needs and it being, taking up so much time, all the old coping strategies that I'd used to get through life and work just didn't work anymore in that situation.
Like
And
lots and lots and lots of little triggers and shocks,
yeah,
shock, 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 shock,
yeah,
shock, shock.
yeah. And then I think the breastfeeding was a big thing for me because I'd always, there's obviously so much information we have about how that's best for baby. So I was determined to do it, even though I was having difficulty. And I think that's one of the reasons it happened as well. If I'd have said from day one, okay, this isn't going to work for me, I'll use bottles, maybe it wouldn't have happened because I would have got more sleep and I wouldn't have got the mastitis. Because another thing, psychiatrists think could contribute is about infection. So, that could, I mean, we know, don't we, infection contributes to the mental state with older people get a infection. We know that worsens dementia or can make them present as if they've got dementia when they might not. So all those
So,
factors
so
combined just,
it's pain and stress, and everything's new, 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 and it's opposing anything and everything you ever known for yourself and your body and your
mm,
mind. And then this demanding little darling who needs milk, and then all your triggers as a mother, I suppose. And so it sounds like it's just a firing squad of all sorts of different triggers all over the place. And then if you've got mastitis, it's so painful, isn't it? I mean, I didn't, but
mm,
I couldn't feed my baby for 4 days. It was a
mm,
struggle.
mm,
And luckily, I mean, I normally they kick you out straight away. You have your baby. When I had my second, it was out pretty
mm,
much the same
mm.
day.
Yeah.
And then with my first, um, it was suspected that they wanted to keep us in for a week
Mm,
for whatever. When he came out, I was in that bath thing, and he drank in some water, and they gave him antibiotics. I wanted to monitor for a week, but luckily, because I was on my own, I hadn't. Typically, in this day and age, these days, I mean, that was 22 years ago, wasn't it? But I don't know what it was like for you, but typically, um, women have no one. Their husband or
mm,
partner goes out to work if you've got one, and 9 out of 10 of my friends had no one. Just a
mm,
couple had their mothers, and that was it. Which
mm,
is such
mm.
a shame, really, isn't it? Because you need someone there. You need
mm,
someone who's
mm,
been through it, especially someone close like an auntie or a mother,
mm,
perhaps a
mm,
sister. So you have that sort of path for you and the
mm, mm,
support, and somebody who can do the washing up and you can sleep or something.
mm. I mean,
But
luckily
tip
I did have
with
support. In
you,
fact, I mean, once
oh,
I
that's
was
good.
diagnosed, I was only not sectioned on the kind of proviso that someone would be with me 24/7 and I'd never be on my own with the baby because sadly, when a mum has got postpartum psychosis, she is a risk to herself and to the baby. And there are, terrible outcomes in some cases of,
Really?
mums taking their own lives and sometimes
Oh
the
my
baby's
gosh,
life because it is that serious a level of mental illness that,
awful, isn't
yeah,
it?
total, like irrational decisions made, which can have terrible consequences.
Really.
Someone I had to have like people there to support me for a long time. Otherwise, I would have had to be sectioned in a hospital.
So what happened then? So that they came along, and this was a terrifying moment for you. And did they make the decision or try to talk to you there and then, or did they go away and discuss, or what
No, so
happened?
they kind of asked questions, did observations, looked at the, decided. And actually, I found out afterwards because I've obviously got contacts in the services as well. So a mental health act assessment
Isn't it?
team back then, I'm not sure how it is now, is made up of a social worker, a GP, a psychiatrist, I think sometimes one other. There were definitely four people there then. And the GP and the psychiatrist, they wanted to section me. But the social worker who happened to know my family because of people working in the services persuaded them that it was safe for me to be cared for at home
Oh,
because she knew that there were lots of mental health professionals and my parents around that would provide sort of significant
amazing.
support. But another interesting thing,
Very
probably
scary.
it wasn't mentioned initially, but a bit later on when I was still like not recovering well. So at first they were just talking about section me and I'd have to go to a hospital and my baby stay at home, be cared for, by his dad, by my family. But there is
I think that's what happens a lot though, that mum and baby are separated for different reasons. And I think that personally, I think that's one of the worst things can even happen. I mean, even already you're in a delicate state, and then to take your baby off you. To me, I mean, I'm not a medical professional. It's only my personal opinion. Having had a couple of kids, worked as a natural therapist for 35 years. From there, that and what I've observed from other women is that if you take a baby off the mother, it's extreme. I mean, all her hackles are going to be all her buttons are going to be pressed because there's your breast milk, pumping up through your body, and your whole body's full of hormones, as you know.
mm.
You're already in a stress state, and then to take the baby off. I mean, I don't know what do you think about that? Do you?
So what I know now, and it wasn't offered to me initially at that first assessment, but it was after a few weeks, is that we're very lucky that in the NHS in the UK, and this is some of the work I've been involved with in subsequent years, we have mother and baby units. And
I
those
do.
are like specialist units for mums that are very unwell with postpartum psychosis or other severe kind of mental health disorders after childbirth. And on those units, mum is admitted, she could be sectioned on those units, she could be there voluntarily. Mum and baby are admitted together. And on those units, there's
Amazing.
all the kind of mental health recovery help you'd get on a normal ward, but there's also specialist help with bonding with the baby. There's nursery nurses to help looking after with the baby. There's, groups and activities taking place with other mums and their babies. So there's actual support with that bonding. There's support with looking after baby, but she say mum and
Amazing.
baby aren't separated because that bonding and attachment is so important for mum's recovery, and it's so important for babies, long-term
Definitely.
development and health.
Absolutely. I mean, we had Matthew Appleton on the podcast a little while ago, and he talked. His speciality is all about releasing the trauma of birth, but it's really throughout the birth and before, when you're in the mother's womb and the birth and afterwards, that little baby, um, you can carry trauma from that all your life. And I
Easy.
know certainly with my own work with the pain-free method that many, many times I work with people with current adult physical life issues. When we go back to the root of it, it's when they popped out of the mother. What
Mm,
happened?
mm,
One of the typical things of trauma is the baby is taken away from the mother. It's
mm,
in the body.
mm,
So
mm.
I'm so pleased that they're doing that now. I'm so pleased for the women that are suffering those
Yeah.
things.
I mean, they did exist back then, and I was ill 4 years later again after my second baby, and both times I was offered an admission to a mother and baby, but no one really explained to me what the benefits of that were or what they did. And looking back now, I sort of wish I'd gone really, but it wasn't well explained to me. So some of the work I've done since in my career has, yeah, been also some of the work around those kind of specialist services, both the community ones and the mother and baby units, including working on a national programme where there was funding to open additional mother and baby units because, I just know from my own personal experience how vital they are and how, what a difference that makes both short and long term to have that specialist care.
Absolutely. I'm so pleased they are too. Absolutely. So what happened to you then? So then you were supported by these professionals and friends and family. How did it go
Yeah.
for you?
So to be honest, for about probably 5 to 6 months, it didn't go well because first of all, I wasn't really open to the treatment. I massively resented suddenly moving from being, a professional working in mental health to receiving care. So I held all this self-stigma, it's really kind of stigmatized myself, couldn't accept that situation. But also the care I got for about 5 months, it wasn't specialist to my situation, to a mum with a baby. And no one told me that. I know now it was postpartum psychosis, but no one told me that for 5 months until I got to access the right type of care. So it was really a horrendous time when they first came and didn't section me, but one of the things they did do was put me on lots of strong medication to like make me sleep for a long time. They didn't consider the fact that I was breastfeeding and they just gave me something I couldn't breastfeed on. So having to stop just like that obviously creates more problems with hormones, more problems, just with swelling and everything. So it was a really, really tough time. And I started to the medication which brought down the mania kind of solved the psychotic kind of part of it, those kind of strong medications, which are kind of essential at that point. But because I seemed to do well and I didn't tell people, I still felt terrible inside. So I came off the medication. I decided myself I didn't want to take it because, after the weeks went on and my husband went back to work, I couldn't wake up in the night to feed the baby because of the medication. That made me feel really guilty. So I came off the
Absolutely.
medication without telling them. And then and I never recommend this, by the way. So when I told them I had come off it, they're like, "Oh, well, you shouldn't have done that, but you seem to be okay." But I actually wasn't okay because then what happened is I went into something which I now know is typical with postpartum psychosis, that after that initial kind of manic and psychotic time, it's very common to then go into a very deep depression and have a lot of anxiety. That's part of the pattern of the illness. And they don't know the pattern. But for me, guilt and shame was a big part of it, feeling so ashamed and guilty about that, all that money I'd spent, and, just worrying all the time and getting on, but putting a mask on that, getting on, doing what needs to be done day to day, with the baby, getting on with things, but just increasingly feeling terrible inside until in the end, I was just crying and crying and couldn't stop, and I had to admit I needed help again because I'd been like discharged by that point. So luckily I was able to get, back to kind of see a psychiatrist again. But again, when I got back in, I wasn't given any hope of recovery. I mean, what I was told was, oh, you've had an episode of being high and an episode of being low, so it means your diagnosis is bipolar. And so all I could then, so I didn't feel any hope of recovery. And they didn't say, actually, like this happen, this quite, well, it's not common, but it happens to 1 to 2 in 1,000 women after child. But if they get this postpartum psychosis, a high and a low, but quite a lot of those women never relapse again. They just have that one episode. But I was never told any of that. And I was never, as I say, I was never told what's happening here is postpartum psychosis. So it was only yeah, after 5 to 6 months, because I wasn't recovering and things weren't going well. I mean, I was due to have gone back to work by then and I had to be off sick. So, luckily at that point, because I was still off sick, because I worked for the mental health trust that covered my county, they said, well, really, you need to see a specialist perinatal psychiatrist. But that specialist community team that deals particularly, with mums and babies when mum's unwell, they didn't cover the area I live because it was still very much a postcode lottery. So, and it was a real turning point the day I got to see a specialist, what they call a perinatal psychiatrist, because she was the first person to tell me this is postpartum psychosis, this is what happens. Many women make a good recovery. To really look at to tell me lots of stuff I'd never been told before that was really helpful to
So
know.
this is the
So
first
that was a
time in
real
six
turning
months.
point. So from then I
Yeah.
started to recover, and there was a specialist perinatal nurse there as well, helped with stuff about the baby and childcare. But up to that
And
point,
this
I
is,
hadn't had that specialist care.
and that was the first time in 6 months.
Mm, yeah,
Gosh.
yeah,
But how
yeah.
was
So
the baby all during this time? Because that meant the baby doesn't have its normal growing routine and bonding routine.
yeah. Yeah,
And
so
did
he
you?
was luckily, my mum and dad, because my dad sadly kind of died during the time I was still recovering quite suddenly. But yeah, mum and dad
Wow.
were there helping my husband, other friends and family, and I was still able to do stuff, to go through the motions. But looking back, I wasn't going through them with the proper emotional attachment or bonding that I should have had. I was doing the weaning, the feeding, and I mean, I was lucky to of like when I was like in the early, like when I was recovered enough to appear relatively kind of normal. I was able to join at that time. The health visitors in my area run a postnatal kind of support group. So every Thursday we went along and there were different speakers, different sessions. So I met these other mums with babies of very similar age. And I mean, with like a lot, sort of quite a few members of that group, we're still in touch now, and the kids are good friends with each other. So I had that
Oh,
group. So I
incredible.
got so then my baby was socializing, going to activities with them. I was doing all that, going to the local oh, what do they call the family kind of centre, the children's
Yeah.
centre they were called at the
Yeah. Yeah.
time, doing the
Yeah.
musical
The 1 o'clock,
activities.
the 1 o'clock club they called it, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Back
yeah.
then.
So we were doing. So he was doing all those things and being around other mums and babies and socialising. But with that group, I'm still in touch with now. We go on holiday together every couple of years, and the kids all meet
Amazing.
up. And it's like, but I didn't tell them that I was unwell until probably about that 6 month point because the conversation started about, oh, when you're going back to work. And I had to, because people were starting to go back, and I had to say, well, actually, I was already due to go back, but I was signed off sick because I've actually, I mean, and then I only said I've had postnatal depression. I didn't tell them the extremes of it. Well, I didn't understand that myself because that was when I still hadn't really been told myself. So, yeah, so the proper attachment and bonding of mum to baby kind of wasn't there, probably in the emotional depth it should have been, but because, well, as we often do as women, we carry, you know, we mask stuff, don't we? And we get on because yeah. So I was getting on doing all the things, but I wasn't feeling it inside, I suppose. I wasn't feeling the emotional connection to it, and I was feeling so different than other mums. I wasn't feeling I was the same as them. Anything they said or did that seemed to be the right thing that I wasn't doing, it just increased my self-stigma.
Wow. So how did you go from that point then? This is 5, 6 months. You're beginning to understand what you're doing, but you're still going through the motions. You don't have that bond. And where did things go from there
Yeah,
for you?
so it was the September that I kind of saw the perinatal psychiatrist. Well, it might have got my medication adjusted a bit, was told stuff that was really helpful for me to have my own hope of recovery. So then by the December, I went back to work part-time. So I was recovered enough to start to rebuild normal life. As I said, I went back to work early December, just on 2 days a week, a negotiated phased return. And then that Christmas, my dad died suddenly. So it was one of those really horrible years, everything happened. But I was well enough then to support my mum through that. So really from then on, I went back to work, back in mental health services in the NHS, building up my hours, as you do after maternity leave. And on the days I wasn't working, having swimming lessons, meeting up with that group. So functioning day to day like a normal mum. But it turned things around in my career and work, that because I'd received services myself and realised how much of it was wrong, how the culture was wrong, how I felt so disempowered when I was like a patient receiving services compared to people providing them, how I felt I had no choice or control over my care, about how, the things people told me, the language that was used was really unhelpful. I started to just get really passionate about, reframing, sort of leading change really in mental health services and the culture of services. So because I was gone back and I wasn't able to really go back to clinical face-to-face patient work initially anyway, because that was obviously far too triggering and traumatic with where I was myself. And I was still on medication for a couple of years, but well and functioning, although it did probably make me tired. So I ended up my career I moved into being like a project manager and then a program manager in these NHS leadership positions around kind of change programs, which luckily were coming in, for national policy or different campaigners at that time, to change the way services are offered, to give back, to try and equalise the relationship between kind of the patient and the professional, to give hope of recovery. So there was a program I worked on called the Recovery Approach program, and one of the things that I loved about that was that they also introduced peer support, so that part of the care would be being
Interesting.
able to talk to somebody else that had that condition and recovered.
That sounds marvelous
So
because
that would have made
as a,
such a difference to me,
yeah.
because I had no cope of recovery. I was like, oh, this has happened, my life is over. So over those years when I was leading those change programs, I mean, I had a second baby and I got unwell again. But this is an interesting story, I think, regarding those specialist services, because I was terrified at first, and of course the others in my mum's group started being pregnant with second babies, etc. But I was just terrified to go back to that place, because with postpartum psychosis, there's a kind of 1 to 2 in 1,000 risk in the general population. You can get it out of the blue, but if you've had it once, you're sort of 50-50 risk of getting it if you have another baby. But
Incredible.
because I could access that specialist perinatal psychiatrist and, have what they call sort of preconception care and prepare for pregnancy and be aware of the risks and change the birth plan and start medication straight after the birth and change the way the care in the maternity ward was provided. It was only because I knew that care was there that I decided to have another baby. So it ended up being 4 years later. And because in the hospital, I got plenty of sleep because they gave me a separate room. Breastfeeding went a lot better, and I took an antipsychotic sort of preventative medication as soon as the baby was born. That was part of the preventative care plan. So I didn't get that psychotic episode because things were going well. Came off the medication again. I didn't supervise this time. But that time, when my second baby was 9 weeks old, I did get the depression and the anxiety again. But this time, like really within 3 months, it was, I was very unwell again, was offered a mother and baby unit again, but got better much more quickly because this time I had hope of recovery because I'd recovered before.
Totally
Um,
different scene.
so
Same situation, but totally different. You
yeah,
had the resources in place, you had
yeah,
knowledge in
yeah.
place, you had hope in place. You preempted things all in place.
Yeah. So after 10 years of kind of working, in the NHS, improving mental health services in different ways, keep going up the leadership level ladder in different roles, doing that, I started to hear that those specialist perinatal psychiatry services were kind of at risk of being defunded in the NHS organisation I was working in. I thought that is no good. People don't understand how important they are. So I started to at that point, I sort of recovered enough, got over my self-stigma enough to think I want to tell my story to help other people, and I want to directly kind of support, women in that situation. So then I started to do a lot of work about telling my story, both internally to help, other managers understand the importance of those services, externally in the media, just to raise awareness of postpartum psychosis. And this is when I got involved in the charity that I'm now trustee of. So the charity is Action on Postpartum Psychosis, APP, and that charity didn't exist, wasn't formed when I was unwell, although they were like doing some research into postpartum psychosis back in those early days, the women that founded the charity. And that was some of the helpful stuff that psychiatrist had given me the first time. So with APP, they trained me as a media volunteer to be able to tell my story. I went on a live stream on Facebook at the BBC and all sorts of things. But also, I trained as a peer supporter. So one of the key services they offer is peer support for women and family members who have, been impacted by postpartum psychosis. And that peer support is one of my biggest passions because I know it would have made such a difference to me to have it. So there's an online peer support forum where anybody can go on anonymously, talk about, get advice, or you can be matched one to one. So that was amazing to be able to do that work for them. But also around that same time, there was lots of women starting to tell their story. There was lots of raising awareness about this whole issue of postnatal mental health. So some of those few specialist clinic, perinatal psychiatrists that did exist were working with women who have recovered to raise political awareness. So that was the time that like the government did allocate a lot of funding to develop those specialist services across the country. So my best job in the NHS was that for 3.5 years. I worked in NHS England, the national NHS body, as one of the managers of the programme that introduced those specialist perinatal community services to every locality across England. So that because remember there was a postcode lottery for me, and I only got access because I was a staff member because it didn't cover the area I live, but also so we had the funding to make sure these specialist services were developed across the country, and also to fund more mother and baby units. So any
Amazing,
management
Tracy.
job in the NHS is stressful, particularly when you're passionate about it and things move slowly. But that was my most amazing job, which I did for
This is
three and a half years.
beautiful, Tracy, and I'm sure it's going to help so many other women going through something similar. And
Yeah.
I think, sometimes life kind of does it to us that at the time it's absolutely dreadful and it's challenging and it's difficult and all sorts of things. But the way I see life these days, I mean, I'm 50 something and I see the cycles of life that when we go through dramatic, awful things, it's actually it can be a great learning and you've turned it all around so that you help people, you help other women and other mothers and you set up everything in place because you know exactly how they might be feeling
Mm, mm.
because you've been through it yourself.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. It's
th- there's the
say
jewel.
it's kind of like we're taught as mental health professionals, as coaches, or whatever we do to have empathy. But I think the level of empathy goes that so much deeper when you don't have to put themselves in their place. You've been in their place, and you can really like know that level of distress or you know, like lack of power they feel, or the emotional trauma of it all. So yeah,
It
and
must be absolutely terrifying. I mean, I know when I had social workers monitoring me, I mean, in yourself, you think, what's the matter? I'm right and they're wrong. And it's absolutely terrifying. My biggest fear was that they were going to take my children away. I was
Oh,
absolutely
yeah.
petrified. So I was sort of behaving very aware of that, and behaving accordingly, that answer their questions right and let them
Mm,
have give them access as needed. But it really, inside, I was petrified
yeah,
that
yeah,
they were
me
going to take my
too.
babies
Yeah.
away.
Yeah, I mean,
You
that
know,
was like, that's probably when I sat on the sofa being terrified and everything. It was like, crikey, I'm going to lose the baby. They'll think I'm mad and I'm going to lose the baby. And I remember during the second pregnancy, I was very distressed at one point. I was seeing the perinatal psychiatrist, and she was lovely, but she had to tell me one day that there was a new policy in place that if somebody like got diagnosed with postpartum psychosis, automatically social workers became involved. And that terrified me because I thought, well, if I get unwell again and they might take the baby away then. And that was one of the most terrible. And I know it still is for many women now. They don't come forward with any level of, mental ill health kind of concerns or, looking for support because they
I think
associate
it's
that support with the baby being taken away, which of course isn't the reality in most cases. But
what is the reality? Because that's a very real terror for a mother, and we all know it. That in this day and age, obviously, those women and I certainly knew that that was a real possibility, and
mm,
I had to sort of dance to their tune to answer their questions that I thought they wanted. It wasn't really help at all from my
mm,
point of view. It wasn't proper concern
mm,
and
mm.
proper support on my point of view. And to have that terror on top of all your trauma, your challenges, and how have things changed these days? What happens these days then?
I mean, I think for women with kind of a mild to moderate kind of illness in that period, there's still people don't get always access to the type of psychological support they need, the right type of peer support group. So there's many charities offering that for women with kind of what they call in the NHS sort of moderate to severe end, which postpartum psychosis would be included in, and other, more severe illnesses that affecting the functioning more. We've got the specialist services across the country that include psychiatrists, nurses, occupational therapists, social workers, peer supporters. So there's specialist mental health social workers within those teams providing support, liaising with the social workers, in the children and families teams to sort of make it. And obviously in some cases there's other background things going on with the home situation, or so it's not that nobody's baby's ever taken away, because of course sometimes it is, but for like various other complex reasons. But for women, who've got a mental health problem which they can recover from, sort of generally, in most cases, the services are able to work together to make sure that doesn't happen. And, mum is with baby again when she's recovered, or ideally sort of during the recovery.
Do they understand these days that that's a very last ditch resort to take the baby
Oh
away?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
like it's
that's
like
good
the
to hear.
emphasis is always on keeping families together unless it's definitely unsafe to do so. So yeah, I mean, obviously sort of things change over time. I mean, back probably as recently as 60, 80 years ago, a woman with postpartum psychosis, there's films about this and books and people's stories of their, recent ancestors of women might be institutionalized for the rest of her life after that.
It happens. It does, doesn't
Yeah.
it? And before, people were quick to shove you away, take you away, lock you away, and then
Mm,
it becomes even a bigger problem because the whole family knows. And I've certainly had got some history of that way back. And looking back, it's like, well, we've learned, isn't it? Things are different these days. I remember it was a great auntie who was sectioned. She was shoplifting, and we had money. I come from a wealthy family, and and gradually, as I became an adult and learning about that particular story, um, her husband was gallivanting around, a womanizer, and back in those days, you stayed with your husband no matter what, or you risked being in the poorhouse, and severe problems. And she had three babies, so it's like, was it because of that? Because of her trauma of dealing with that husband's behavior? It could have
mm,
been that. I don't know. You don't really. It's difficult to go through the family because everyone's got opinions about different people in the family. It's
mm,
it's not clinical documentation, but I'm so pleased that things have changed then, and you've been a massive part of that. I'm thrilled, for women who may be going through that, because it's not an easy time, in the first 2 or 3 years of having children. It's very extremely demanding. And if you don't have support of some kind, or you're getting triggered emotionally, or your hormones and all that, which everybody does, I think,
mm,
um, if you don't have support in some sense, it's a tall order no matter what. I know when I
mm,
when I had my children, that I thought must be different by now, and my children
mm,
were 16 years ago. Must be different by now from when I was a little girl. That there must be support these days, but basically, typically, as far as I can tell, most women will go from a single working life, independent life, and then you go the opposite way to having a fully dependent being, which is not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, financially, time-wise, in every sense. You are that baby's life, and
mm,
you can't really function your life for at least
mm,
2 or 3 years. And then if
mm,
you have another child like we did,
mm,
that deepens. And so where is the support? How are you supposed to pay bills? How are you supposed to do all the cleaning? How are you look after yourself,
mm,
and
mm,
function your own life, or whatever that looks like at that time? It's a tall order. It's a tall
mm,
order.
mm,
If I had known, I would have set things up differently. I mean, I don't know if I had psychosis or whatever, but you certainly get affected
mm,
um,
mm,
big time, because this little darling is of course is 100% demanding of you, and that
mm,
goes on for at least 2 or 3 years before you
mm.
start to they start to become a little bit able
Yeah,
at
yeah,
3 or 4 years old.
absolutely. So even without the kind of psychosis or a serious mental illness at that level, I think it's so common that like when you become a mum, it's like, oh, there's a lot that's unexpected mentally, emotionally, in your body and your mind, and totally lose yourself, particularly if you've who's sort of been a professional woman, busy working, etc., and then have the baby and everything changes. But of course, many women now, they have to go back to work financially, or they choose to, that they want to get that career back. They don't want to give up themselves. And that's that's the women I work with now, sort of since I've left the NHS. Last year, I did another big management job in maternity after that national job, but started to realize it's like becoming increasingly difficult to drive positive change in the environment of, such a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of governance, very little funding for things, different priorities, it's kind of tough to change via the NHS. But so I started to think, how could I continue to make difference to women in a different way, more directly? Because as you say, for me, that episode of illness has showed me my purpose, has always showed me my way of what I need to be doing, and and different phases for my own life where I need to focus my energy. So so now, sort of, I work directly with women who are or have returned to work after they've experienced some kind of mental illness during that maternity period, because they have lost their professional confidence. They kind of lost themselves, as you say. There's all the complexities of how do you balance childcare? How do I ask for flexible work? And how do I talk to my colleagues about the fact that maternity leave wasn't brilliant for me because I was unwell? How do I manage my new relationship with my in-laws now that they're looking after my baby 3 days a week? It's a very, very kind of complex time with a lot going on. kind of returning to work after maternity. So whilst they might be recovered on the surface if they've had some sort of illness, their confidence is really not. And yeah, it's a very kind of another tricky transition. I feel like the transition into being a mum is like the biggest like life transition a woman can have. But then you're going through that, not recovered from that, and then you've got to balance being a professional woman with being a mum and work out, the guilt we all carry about whatever we focus on with baby at home or work. There's always like some guilt caught up with whichever however you're spending your time in any one moment, however you're spending your attention.
Exactly. And then, of course, all of that, so that's not enough. Then your body's changing and your hair, nobody tells you what happens to your body after you have a baby or when you have a baby. I,
No,
you know,
no,
no,
exactly.
I think it's like a well-kept secret because everybody's slightly different. Everyone has a different experience, I think, but nobody tells you because they don't want to worry you and stress you out, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things with postpartum psychosis that like part of some of the campaigning has been they don't always talk about it in antenatal groups because they don't want to scare women because it's relatively rare. But when it does happen, it's an emergency and urgent help is needed. So mum and her partner, her family, people need to be aware it can happen so that if they see it happening, they get help quickly, bring in services because it can deteriorate quickly. So, yeah, there's a lot of like some of these things, and it wouldn't need to be such a shock in motherhood if there was more honest sharing of what can happen.
Yeah, because I don't remember any of that. I mean, I remembered you just sort of get left to it pretty much. I mean, they kick you out of hospital very early, and where it used to be 10 days minimum. And I just by default, I managed to get, I think it was about 7 days, but then my baby was full of antibiotics, which I don't agree with, but that's another story. But
Mm,
luckily, I was kept in for 5 hours for a week. So there was a nurse showing me how to wash my baby. I was completely clueless. I mean, I could
mm,
guess I'm quite practical, but I'll figure it out. But I, somebody who experienced with young babies, it was lovely to have midwives there, head nurse, and showing me how to wash the baby properly and showing me how to breastfeed and get on with it because I couldn't for 4 days. Um, and but typically you just get left to it and you figure it out yourself. And then if you've got, of course, your hormones and everything we've been talking about can happen. And my partner just went off to work, and I thought, well, okay, that's sort of it. What do I do then?
It's really
You're left to it. And I think,
yeah,
the world has changed. When I was young, my parents typically in the 60s, 70s, like many people, the woman didn't work and the husband paid the bills. So he could be out to work and the woman did the house and the kids. Um, and nowadays, just in one generation, it looks to me like the majority of people can't do that. Usually, it takes two people to run a mortgage these days.
yeah, yeah, that's
And
right.
then what do you do? I, I would say that I would recommend to all women, if I could talk to myself back then, I would have said stay away from work for at least a year, and
Mm,
ideally 5 years
mm,
to get into
mm,
motherhood, to give your time and effort and mothering to your child for the
mm,
nurturing of that child. And I would say 5 years. Maybe do a
mm,
little
mm,
part-time job if you're getting bored and fed up or whatever, or go to lots
mm,
of mother baby groups and because that's where you have
mm.
bonding, isn't it? Like
Yeah,
you, I've
yeah.
got lots of friends from that time still.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, 1 to 5 years, I would say. But
mm.
the way that we're set up in the UK is that that's not it's not conducive for that. If you're lucky,
No,
I mean,
no.
I worked I had I was self-employed, so I think it was 6 months of minimal support.
Mm,
It
mm,
it wasn't enough to live a life or function a life with baby,
mm,
but it
mm.
was certainly helpful. I think it was about £500
Yeah,
a
yeah,
month or something. It was very minimal.
yeah.
And but then what? Then I'm completely reliant on my partner. And if my partner hasn't got a good job or he's unemployed or he's not helpful or whatever, what do you do? I mean,
Mm.
I went
And I
back to work
think,
early because
yeah,
I wanted to work, but
Yeah,
It
and
wasn't right
that's
though.
yeah, that's what I find, so with the women I work with now, with my kind of non-directive coaching approach, like everybody's situation is so different. In some families, the mum, she wants to go back to work full time. She loves that career, and actually dad wants to stay at home with the baby, or there are different ways of juggling different part-time flexible work in between them. Sometimes I think for some of the mums, it is most difficult. That I'm working with is when they want to be able to stay home, but it's just not financially feasible. They've actually, found that actually they really want to spend more time with their baby, their toddler, but it's not financially feasible because of their, commitments and the cost of living. So they have to go back to work. So that's very tough to come to resolution with for them, is that they've got to go back even though they don't want to, and they're very well bonded with the baby and they want to be there. So, but everybody's situation is so different, and the support they've got surrounding them, their access to childcare, and of course, like some women love that career so much, and they've taken 10, 15 or more years building it, and they want to carry on building it, but then they could be made to feel guilty for that. So through the kind of coaching we do, it really is space for them to think about what really matters with them, to connect with their self, with their, my business is called Mother Nature Coaching, and in a sense, it helps women connect to their own Mother Nature, their own nature as mothers, their deep connection to themselves. And that's
Exactly.
why I use nature connection in my coaching, because I think it's when we're connected in nature, with nature, really kind of getting to that true part of ourselves, we can make the decisions that are right for us and use our intuition. Because I think another thing, of course, about modern motherhood is there's so more than ever with social media, so much advice about what's the right thing to do, what the parenting method is, what you should or shouldn't be feeding, the way you should or shouldn't be working. That's one of the things I just found really distressing, the confusing, conflicting information and deciding what's right. And it's very hard to just be that naturally connected mum and think I'm going to make my own decisions about what feels right, because I think the way our society's run, we're not allowed to just make decisions as according to how we feel. We have to comply with society's norm, or employers' expectations, or the financial demands, etc. So just connecting back to, and it really helps their confidence as well, to connect back to their inner self, to re-find that
I
true
love it.
self that's still left inside after all that, massive change of becoming a mum, and think, okay, what's left is what do I really feel about my career now? What is it I want to do? How do I want to be able to balance that, my career ambitions and my future career with, how I want to be with my baby and my, young child in these few years, and say that like, everybody's comes up with their own kind of plan or their own
Mm.
priorities.
Exactly. And I certainly felt a lot of anxiety about I had to pay the bills, I didn't have enough money, and my fellow wasn't supporting. Because of course, then we haven't talked about our partnership and the strain that gets under as well, and how they
Yeah,
feel,
definitely.
how
Yeah.
our partner feels about the whole situation. So tell us about Mother Nature coaching, and sounds absolutely beautiful. I love the nature part of it because, of course, if you're breathing fresh air and oxygen, and you're getting support from someone like yourself, and guidance and reassurance, I think that's going to go a long way from a new mother and a
Yeah.
woman.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting how it came about. So after I did that job, I said it was a brilliant job for 3.5 years. It was a lot of hours and a lot of commuting. So I decided to take a different NHS management job closer to home and to go full time actually for the first time, because I'd gradually worked up, so I took this like maternity transformation leadership role, because really because I felt, well, we've sorted out perinatal mental health, so dealing with what happens afterwards, but actually some of these illnesses come about because of what happens in the maternity services. So I was doing that, but kind of I started that job around the time of COVID, and then ended up working from home because it was a management role, 9 to 5, sat in front of a laptop all the time, and it was also the time I was entering perimenopause, and that period, which interestingly kind of, I say, and many women with postpartum psychosis recover, never get on well again, but the menopause is a really risky period for relapse because it's hormone related. So during that time of leading that program and I think in the NHS becoming more and more difficult and more political, during and after COVID, my own mental health started to suffer again, and I started to,
Wow.
experience some similar symptoms to the anxiety and the depressive time. Started exploring HRT, but also started to kind of work with a really good professional coach about my job and what I wanted to do, and I realized I didn't want to stay working like that during the menopause period, and I wanted to help women in a different way. So I ended up training as a coach, as a transformative coach, and during my coach training, so that was sort of traditional coaching, you're having a non-directed conversation to help people make decisions, work out what's right for them, what plans they want to move forward to. But during that training, I heard about this notion of walking coaching. So I thought, oh, that sounds interesting because I know it's can be much easier to have an honest conversation and be connected to yourself if you're walking together with somebody. So I went to so I thought, oh, I'd really like to specialise in that type of coaching. And I attended this coaching outdoors like sort of event. I thought it was coming from an NHS professional background. I was calling it a conference, but it was actually more like a retreat kind of retreat kind of networking event. And I learned about all these kind of ways you can use nature and the outdoors in your coaching, like having connections to trees, about, walking mindfully, etc. So I thought, oh, that's what I want to. I want to work with women that are recovering, from a postnatal mental health problem, and I want to help them connect to themselves and make decisions that are right for them. I want to use nature connected coaching.
It all pinged into play. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and that's
We
when I
had
came up with this name, Mother Nature Coaching.
Perfect, perfect. And it just sounds just ripe and ready for a woman in that situation. You're in nature, the beautiful nature and the smell and the trees. You've got support and some kind of buddy experience and knowledge and guidance. I guess, they're going to be breathing better and grounding better and feeling supported, even if
Mm,
they're going crazy. They've got a professional person who knows exactly what they're going through. And it sounds all in place, Tracy. It sounds
mm.
lovely. So, whereabouts do people get in touch with you? How do they find
Yeah,
out if they know that they need some help from you?
yeah. So the coaching doesn't have to be in nature, so it can be remote from where I am as well. So I do coach people walking in nature if they're kind of somewhere near me in Kent. But I can also use nature connection online for using images, nature-based mindfulness, and we can also be both walking in nature in different locations, but be on the phone. So yeah, so
Brilliant.
to get in touch with me, so I've got my profile on LinkedIn, Tracey Robinson, that's the main place I'm regularly posting. I've also got Mother Nature Coaching Facebook page. So they're the key places to kind of get in touch and find out about what things I've got coming up. I'm running on a regular basis this year a free confidence building workshop for women returning to work after anxiety or depression during maternity leave. So that's a chance to learn some nature-based tools that they can apply, in their daily life at home and at work, but also to work through a simple self-assessment tool to get clearer about what's worrying them about their return to work and to start to make some decisions about what they want to do about those things and some actions to take forward. So yeah, go to Tracey Robinson on LinkedIn, on Mother Nature Coaching on Facebook, find out about those upcoming workshops and the other kind of one-to-one activities and programs I've got going on.
Amazing, Tracy. It's really beautiful. And although you had a very difficult, challenging start to this whole cycle, it's really beautiful, I think, what you're doing. And I think it's going to help so many women, and
Mm.
in such a beautiful way. And so you mentioned one to one. So you do it in groups as well as one to one, is it? Or
So at the moment, I've got that confidence building workshop, which is a group, but I know people carry a lot of self-stigma, so people can be anonymous in that group. It's a sort of an interactive workshop, but they're doing their own activity in their own space, so they can share or not, or keep their camera off. So my other programs are one to I can offer like a one-off session, a set of 3 sessions, or a set of 6 sessions, which is most recommended to work through returning to work, the different issues arising. But I'm hoping later in the year, I'm thinking of setting up some groups as well, so people can receive that kind of nature-based coaching in groups whilst also getting peer support.
It sounds absolutely beautiful. And so we have come to the top of the hour. We've gone a bit over, but it's been absolutely fascinating, and I think well worth sort of talking through all of this. And Rose says, "Great podcast, thank you, Rose." And Tracey, I wish you all the best, and please do, if you're listening to this on recording or live, that. On YouTube, that please do get in touch with Tracey, and you might feel it's a bit of a stigma, but I don't think I realized I had some kind of I knew I was very stressed and very stretched, and to have joined that group, that I think that would have been extremely supportive and helpful with
Mm,
a medical professional like yourself who had direct knowledge of what I may have been going through. I think that would have been absolutely wonderful if could have joined a group like that back then, because you're sort of clutching in the dark a little bit. So I wish you all the very best with Mother Nature coaching, Tracey, and please do get in touch who's listening to this. So I'm going to bring the podcast to a close then, and thank you so much everybody for joining us, for watching on YouTube live, and also if you're watching on the replay, do click the notification bell so that you get the recordings sent straight to you, and like and subscribe, because it sends this message out to all those women who may be suffering too. It just sends the message out when you click on the like and share and subscribe and these sort of things. It just sends the message out wide and far. So thank you so much, Tracey, for your time. And I always like to leave my guests with the last word. How would you like to leave everybody today?
I think, that everything, when you're going through tough times like that, there is a way through it. There's hope of recovery. And then, looking back on it, I can sort of feel it did show me my purpose and has guided kind of my life afterwards. So I think, yeah, it's just that, you can recover, you're not alone. And, one day you'll be able to look back on that and take the positive learning from it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tracey. It's been wonderful to hear these things. And do get in touch with Tracey if you need some help. Thank you so much, Tracey. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a beautiful day. Bye for now.
Thank you.